Mother, is that truly you? I finally found you.
Yes, my son. I knew you would come for me.
Blood dictates destiny in brutal kingdoms. Mate selection ceremonies usually end in celebrations, but sometimes an act of pure kindness changes history. Whispers echo around a crippled beggar woman dismissed by high-born ladies. Kneeling beside her in dirt was a disgraced outcast, unknowingly securing a crown of fangs. Rain turned the cobblestone courtyard of Ironhold Keep into a treacherous mire, a fitting reflection of the treacherous political landscape within. This was the night of the great mate selection. Noble she-wolves from every corner of the Lycan territories had descended upon the ancient fortress, wrapped in heavy furs, rich velvets, and the cloying scents of imported perfumes. They arrived in gilded carriages bearing the crests of powerful medieval fiefdoms, all desperate to catch the eye of Alpha King Alaric of the Silver Peaks. Among the arriving nobility was Freya of House Abernathy. Unlike the giggling, ambitious ladies surrounding her, Freya was not here for glory. She was an Omega not by birth, but by decree. Her father, Lord Arthur Abernathy, had been falsely accused of treason years ago, stripped of his lands, and banished to the borderlands. Freya had been allowed to remain within the pack solely out of the king's distant mercy, but she was treated as little more than a servant by the elite. Tonight, she wore her mother's repurposed gown, a faded sapphire silk that she had painstakingly mended by candlelight. It was the only piece of her heritage she had left. As the grand bells of the fortress chimed, signaling the opening of the great hall, a chaotic rush ensued. Carriages jockeyed for position near the massive oak doors. It was in this frenzied crush that it happened. A lavish, black-lacquered carriage belonging to House Vane rolled recklessly toward the entrance. Walking perilously close to the grinding iron-spoked wheels was an elderly woman. She was painfully frail, clad in mud-soaked rags that smelled faintly of wet dog and dried pine needles. She leaned heavily on a twisted wooden cane, her face obscured by a tattered gray hood. "Out of the way, you filthy rogue!" shouted the driver of the Vane carriage, cracking a heavy leather whip. The old woman stumbled, her cane slipping on the slick cobblestones. She fell hard into the deep, freezing mud, right in the path of the heavy horses. The noblewomen watching from the steps erupted into collective gasps, not of horror, but of deep disgust. Lady Genevieve Vane, the ruthless and stunningly beautiful frontrunner for the king's affection, stepped gracefully from the carriage. She adjusted her ruby-encrusted bodice and sneered down at the fallen woman. "Disgusting," Genevieve spat, her voice ringing out in the cold air. "Guards, toss this diseased mongrel into the moat before she ruins the scent of the courtyard. The king will not be subjected to the stench of a rogue on his mating night." The old woman weakly raised a trembling hand, gasping for breath, her knee badly scraped and bleeding into the mud. The guards hesitated, but moved forward to follow Genevieve's cruel order. "Stop." The voice was clear, ringing with an authority that betrayed her lowered status. Freya pushed her way through the throng of silk-clad women, ignoring the shocked whispers of the nobility. She threw herself into the freezing mud between the guards and the old woman. "Have you all lost your minds?" Freya demanded, glaring up at Genevieve and the surrounding lords. "We are wolves. Our greatest law is the protection of the pack, the reverence of our elders. Where is your honor?" Genevieve laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "Honor? Spoken like the daughter of a traitor. If you wish to roll in the mud with a rogue, Freya Abernathy, then stay there. The doors are closing. Let us go, ladies. The king awaits." With a swish of expensive cloaks, the nobility abandoned them, marching up the stone steps and disappearing into the warmth of the great hall. The heavy oak doors began to shut with a resounding thud. Freya knew what that meant. To be late to the selection was a profound insult to the Alpha King. It meant permanent exile. Or worse, but as Freya looked down at the old woman, who was shivering violently in the freezing rain, she didn't care. Freya knelt in the muck, her precious sapphire silk instantly ruined, stained black with mud and red with the woman's blood. "Hush now. You are safe," Freya whispered gently. She reached down, gripping the hem of her only beautiful gown, and tore a long strip of the silk free. She wrapped the soft fabric tightly around the woman's bleeding leg, tying it with practiced care. The old woman coughed, her hand reaching up to grip Freya's wrist with surprising strength. Underneath the ragged hood, one eye was visible, a striking, swirling silver, clouded with age but piercing in its intensity. You ruin your fine dress for a dying crone? The old woman rasped, her voice sounding like grinding stones. You will miss your chance at the crown, child. A crown means nothing if the head that wears it lacks a conscience, Freya said softly, wiping the mud from the old woman's cheek with her sleeve. She slipped her arms under the woman, helping her to sit up against the stone wall of the keep. I am already an outcast. One more offense will change little, but I will not leave you to freeze. What is your name? Hilda, the woman lied, her breathing shallow. I am just a wanderer. Lost. Well, Hilda, you are not lost anymore, Freya said, taking off her own woolen shawl and wrapping it around the trembling woman's shoulders. She stayed there in the rain for an hour, ensuring the bleeding stopped, offering the woman sips of water from a guard's flask she had managed to beg. Only when the old woman finally seemed stable, her breathing steady, did Freya realize the sheer gravity of her situation. She was soaked to the bone, her dress was destroyed, and she was terribly, unforgivably late for the king. Go, Hilda murmured, nudging Freya with a frail hand. Face the Alpha. Do not let them say you cowered in the dark. Freya took a deep breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stood up, shivering, mud clinging to her skin and clothes. With her chin held high, she turned toward the imposing doors of Ironhold's great hall. Inside the great hall, the atmosphere was suffocating. 1,000 candles cast flickering light over the tapestries of ancient battles, while massive hearths roared with blazing logs. Yet, Alpha King Alaric felt only a profound, bone-deep chill. Sitting upon the obsidian throne, Alaric looked down at the sea of bowing, desperate women. He was a terrifying figure to behold, 30 years old, his broad chest heavily scarred from territorial wars, his jaw sharp and unrelenting, his eyes, a striking, luminescent amber, scanned the room with bored disdain. The kingdom of the Silver Peaks was bleeding. 5 years ago, during the devastating rogue uprisings, Alaric's father had been killed, and his mother, Queen Mathilda, had been attacked by a dark witch employed by the rebels. The dark magic had fractured her mind and trapped her wolf. In the chaos of the war, she had vanished into the wilds. For 5 years, Alaric had sent search parties to the edges of the continent, to no avail. The loss of the beloved queen had plunged the pack into mourning and instability. Now, the council demanded he take a Luna to stabilize his reign. But as he listened to Lady Genevieve Vane boast about her family's wealth and her pure bloodline, Alaric felt his wolf growl in disgust. They were all hollow, vain, cruel, and hungry for power. None of them possessed the heart required to heal his broken pack. My king, Genevieve purred, stepping to the base of the dais. The selection is complete. All eligible ladies of standing are present. We await your judgment. Suddenly, the heavy iron latches of the great doors groaned. The immense wooden slabs were pushed open, silencing the music and the chatter. 2 royal guards stepped in, their halberds crossed to block the entrance. Standing between them, shivering and dripping a puddle of muddy water onto the pristine marble floor, was Freya. A collective gasp swept through the hall, followed instantly by cruel, mocking laughter. By the goddess, Lord Gregory Vane sneered from the sidelines. The Abernathy girl. Is she trying to insult the crown? Look at her. She smells of the gutters. Freya stood frozen, the warmth of the hall hitting her freezing skin like a physical blow. Her torn blue dress hung in tatters, her hair was plastered to her face, and her arms were smeared with dirt and dried blood. She looked absolutely pathetic, yet she refused to lower her gaze. "Halt!" barked Silas, the captain of the guard. "You are late, Freya of House Abernathy, and you dare enter the Alpha's hall in such a state? This is treasonous disrespect." Genevieve laughed softly, a delicate hand covering her mouth. "Oh, my king, forgive her. The poor girl's mind must be as broken as her father's honor. I saw her in the courtyard, rolling in the mud with a diseased, rogue beggar. She chose the company of filth over the honor of your presence." Murmurs of outrage erupted. Consorting with rogues was a severe crime. Alaric's amber eyes narrowed dangerously. He stood up from his throne, his towering frame casting a long, terrifying shadow over the hall. The room instantly fell into a dead, terrified silence. Alaric slowly descended the steps of the dais. The heavy thud of his boots echoed off the stone walls. As he approached Freya, the crowd parted like water. He stopped mere inches from her. Up close, his sheer size and the suffocating aura of his alpha power made Freya's knees tremble, but she forced herself to stand tall. "You are late," Alaric said, his voice a deep, deadly rumble that vibrated in the chests of everyone present. "And you smell of rogue blood. Explain yourself, Abernathy, before I have you thrown in the dungeons." Freya swallowed hard. "I apologize for my tardiness, my king, and for my appearance, but I cannot apologize for my actions. An elderly woman was nearly trampled in your courtyard by Lady Genevieve's carriage. She was injured and bleeding. I stayed to tend to her." Genevieve scoffed loudly. "A lie. She was a beggar, a trespasser. She deserved to be trampled for daring to soil the stones of Ironhold." Alaric ignored Genevieve completely. He stepped closer to Freya, his chest almost brushing hers. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, taking in her scent. Suddenly, the Alpha King's eyes snapped open, blazing with a terrifying intensity. His heart slammed against his ribs. Beneath the smell of rain, mud, and Freya's natural scent of sweet lavender, there was something else. The blood on Freya's hands, the faint scent clinging to her torn dress. It was the scent of white pines and winter frost. It was a scent no one had smelled in 5 years. It was a scent completely unique to a single bloodline. "This beggar," Alaric whispered, his voice suddenly trembling, a sound that sent shockwaves of confusion through the assembled nobility. The ruthless Alpha King was shaking. "Where is she?" "I left her by the eastern archway, resting against the stone," Freya replied, confused by the sudden wild look in the king's eyes. "She was too weak to move." Alaric spun around, roaring at the top of his lungs. "Silas, take 10 men to the eastern archway immediately. If you do not bring that woman to me unharmed, I will have your heads on spikes." The guards scrambled, terrified by the sudden explosive violence in their king's command. The nobility murmured in shock. Genevieve stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "My king, why do you care for a filthy rogue? This girl has insulted you. She should be." "Silence!" Alaric snarled, his eyes flashing to a complete, inhuman gold. He bared his fangs at Genevieve, forcing the haughty noblewoman to whimper and step back in submission. Minutes felt like hours. The tension in the great hall was thick enough to cut with a broadsword. Freya stood perfectly still, watching as the Alpha King paced the floor like a caged beast, his eyes locked on the grand doors. Finally, the doors opened again. Silas and his guards entered, walking carefully. Between them, supported gently by 2 massive soldiers, was the frail old woman in the tattered gray cloak. She still wore Freya's torn blue silk around her leg, and Freya's woolen shawl around her shoulders. The woman looked around the bright, massive hall, blinking against the light, her clouded silver eyes wide with confusion. Alaric stopped pacing. All the breath left his lungs. The terrifying, ruthless Alpha King of the Silver Peaks collapsed to his knees right there on the hard marble floor. Uncaring of the thousands of eyes watching him, he crawled forward, his hands trembling as he reached up and gently pulled back the tattered gray hood. Beneath the dirt and the grime, despite the deep lines of age and suffering, the face was undeniable. The silver eyes, the faded crescent moon birthmark beneath her left temple. "Mother?" Alaric choked out, a single tear cutting a track down his scarred cheek. The great hall erupted into absolute, deafening pandemonium. The silence that followed Alaric's tearful whisper was absolute. heavy enough to crush stone. The great Alpha King, the most feared warrior in the Northern Territories, remained on his knees, his broad shoulders shaking. Queen Mathilda, believed to have been torn apart by beasts in the wilds half a decade ago, weakly lifted a trembling, mud-stained hand to cup her son's scarred face. "My little wolf," she rasped, her silver eyes filling with tears that washed tracks of pale skin through the grime on her cheeks. "You have grown so tall." "Mother," Alaric choked, burying his face in her palm, uncaring of the dirt. He inhaled the faint scent of winter frost that had survived beneath the stench of the streets. "I searched for you. I tore the continent apart. How are you here?" "I was trapped in a fog of shadows," Mathilda whispered, leaning heavily against the guards. A witch's hex clouded my mind. "I forgot my name, my blood, my wolf. I wandered as a ghost, but tonight, the fever broke, the shock of the cold mud, and the warmth of a kind heart." She turned her gaze slowly toward Freya, who stood shivering in her ruined blue dress, utterly paralyzed by the revelation. A collective gasp of sheer terror rippled through the nobility. The realization of what they had just done, what they had just said, crashed over them like a tidal wave. They had mocked the Queen Mother. They had ordered her thrown into the freezing moat. None realized this more violently than Lady Genevieve Vane. All the color drained from her perfectly powdered face, leaving her looking like a beautifully dressed corpse. Beside her, Lord Gregory Vane took a cautious, trembling step backward toward the shadows of the tapestries. Alaric stood up. When he turned to face the great hall, the vulnerable, weeping sun was gone. In his place stood the Alpha King, a being of primal, terrifying wrath. His eyes did not just glow, they burned with a molten, feral gold that bathed the nearest nobles in amber light. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Who?" Alaric began, his voice a low, vibrating growl that made the crystals in the chandeliers tremble. "Ordered my mother to be thrown to the dogs." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "Genevieve." Mathilda's voice cut through the terror, surprisingly sharp despite her frailty. The old queen pointed a crooked finger at the vain heiress. "The girl in the rubies. She called me a diseased mongrel. She commanded her carriage driver to run me down." Genevieve dropped to her knees, her heavy silk skirts pooling around her. "No! My king, please! I did not know!" She was covered in filth. She smelled of— "You would let an elder die simply because they lacked velvet?" Alaric roared, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. He descended the dais, each step a doom bell ringing for House Vane. "You speak of bloodlines and purity, yet your soul is a rotting carcass." "Alaric, wait," Mathilda said, her silver eyes narrowing as they locked onto Lord Gregory Vane, who was desperately trying to edge toward the grand doors. The Queen Mother's breathing hitched, and a sudden, violent clarity pierced through her clouded gaze. The trauma of her past was unraveling the witch's block. "The snake," Mathilda hissed, her voice rising in panic. "The snake in the grass." Alaric stopped, looking back at his mother. "What do you mean?" "The witch who cursed me," Mathilda cried out, clutching her head as the memories flooded back with agonizing force. "She did not act alone during the uprisings. A lord let her through the western gates. A lord paid her in royal gold to curse my mind so she could steal the crown for his own bloodline." She pointed her trembling finger directly at Gregory Vane. "It was him! Gregory Vane orchestrated the coup. He planted the cursed artifacts in Lord Abernathy's chambers to frame him and remove his only rival." The hall erupted into sheer pandemonium. Lords drew their ceremonial daggers. Ladies shrieked and scrambled away from the Vane family. Freya's heart stopped. Her father, Lord Arthur Abernathy, a man who had died of a broken heart in the miserable borderlands, forever shamed as a traitor, was innocent. The Vanes had destroyed her family to pave their way to the throne. "Lies," Gregory Vane bellowed, drawing his sword in a wild panic. "The old hag's mind is still broken. She speaks madness." He turned to run, but Silas, the captain of the guard, was faster. With a swift, brutal strike of his polearm, Silas knocked the sword from Gregory's hand and forced the traitor to his knees. The royal guards instantly swarmed the Vane family, pinning Genevieve and her father to the cold marble. "Silence him," Alaric commanded, his voice deadly calm. "Strip them of their titles, seize their lands, and throw them in the deepest, darkest cells of Ironhold. They will face the council's justice for high treason, attempted regicide, and the unlawful framing of House Abernathy." Genevieve screamed, thrashing against the guards. "You cannot do this. I am a Vane. I am meant to be your queen." "You are nothing but dirt beneath my boots," Alaric spat, as the screaming Vanez were dragged out of the great hall, their cries echoing down the stone corridors. A heavy, reverent silence fell over the remaining nobility. Silence hung in the great hall, thick and metallic with the scent of fear, broken only by the fading, hysterical screams of Genevieve Vane echoing down the stone corridors. Ironhold Keep had never witnessed such an abrupt and violent shift in power. The remaining nobility stood paralyzed. Lord Harrington of the Western Marches, a notoriously stern and influential duke who had silently watched the Vannis rise to power, was the first to move. He unclasped his ceremonial sword, laying it on the marble floor before dropping to both knees in absolute submission to Queen Mathilda. Slowly, like dominoes falling under the weight of their own survival instincts, the rest of the court followed suit, kneeling amidst their velvet and silk. Amidst this sea of bowing aristocrats, Freya remained standing, her teeth chattered uncontrollably, goosebumps rippling across her freezing, mud-splattered arms. The ruined sapphire silk clung to her shivering frame, a stark contrast to the roaring hearths and gilded chandeliers of the royal court. She felt entirely out of place, a ghost of a banished house suddenly thrust into the blinding light of the Alpha's justice. Yet, as Alpha King Alaric turned away from his weeping mother and locked his molten amber eyes onto her, Freya refused to lower her chin. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, closed the distance between them. Alaric stopped mere inches away. Up close, the sheer magnitude of his presence was suffocating. He was a warlord forged in brutal border conflicts, his broad chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Without a word, he reached up to his massive shoulders and unfastened the heavy iron clasp of his black dire wolf pelt. With a gentleness that entirely defied his terrifying reputation, he wrapped the massive, sweltering cloak around Freya's trembling shoulders. The heavy fur instantly engulfed her, radiating his blistering body heat and the intoxicating, primal scent of wood smoke and crushing winter pine. "You sacrificed the only relic of your heritage," Alaric murmured, his deep voice meant only for her, though it carried through the painfully silent hall. His gaze dropped to the shredded hem of her blue dress, which was still wrapped around his mother's injured leg across the room. "Fabric can be woven again." "My king," Freya replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the chaotic hammering of her heart. "A life extinguished in the mud is lost forever. I did only what the old laws demand of our kind." Alaric slowly reached out, his massive, scarred hand hovering near her face before his calloused thumb gently brushed a streak of freezing mud from her cheekbone. The precise moment his skin made contact with hers, a violent, electrifying jolt snapped through the air. Freya gasped, her eyes flying wide as her inner wolf let out a triumphant, earth-shattering howl within her mind. Alaric physically staggered back a half step, his breath hitching as his pupils blew wide to consume his amber irises. The mate bond ancient, undeniable, and entirely feral slammed into them both. Beneath the harsh stench of the courtyard rain, her true scent of sweet lavender and bruised rain lilies flooded his senses, locking into his soul like a missing puzzle piece. He had almost lost her. He had almost let his fated mate freeze in the courtyard while he entertained vipers. Breathing heavily, Alaric turned to address the kneeling court, his voice vibrating with the raw, untamed power of a fully realized alpha. Lord Arthur Abernathy was a paragon of loyalty, a man I allowed to be destroyed by the whispers of traitors. I banished an innocent man to die in the borderlands, and I allowed his daughter to be treated as a pariah. This was a catastrophic failure of the crown. Gasps rippled through the kneeling lords. An alpha king never apologized. It defied every medieval instinct of their brutal, pride-driven society. Let it be known across every corner of the Lycan territories, Alaric commanded, his voice a booming thunderclap. House Abernathy is exonerated. Their lands, their titles, and their wealth are fully restored, backed by the royal treasury of Ironhold. Any wolf who speaks ill of their name will answer to my claws. Freya squeezed her eyes shut, a ragged sob tearing from her throat. 5 years of agony, of scrubbing floors and wearing rags, of mourning a father who died broken and disgraced. It was over. Her father's name was clean. Furthermore, Alaric declared, turning entirely back to Freya, the terrifying warlord of the Silver Peaks slowly, deliberately, lowered his massive frame until his knee hit the hard marble floor. The mate selection is permanently dissolved. He looked up at Freya, his feral eyes entirely soft, shining with unmasked reverence. Tonight, I saw the rotting core of my own court, Alaric said softly. But I also witnessed a miracle. I saw a woman who had been stripped of everything, yet still found the strength to shield the weak. A crown does not forge a luna. A luna is forged in the fires of compassion, fierce honor, and a heart willing to bleed for her people. Freya Abernathy, you saved my mother, you saved my kingdom, and you have laid claim to my soul. If you will have a foolish king who took too long to see the truth, I beg you to be my equal, my mate, and the Luna Queen of the Silver Peaks. Tears freely tracked through the remaining dirt on Freya's face. She looked at the fearsome man kneeling in the dirtied puddles she had dripped onto the floor, then over his shoulder to Queen Mathilda, who gave her a frail but radiant smile. Pulling the heavy dire wolf cloak tighter around herself, Freya reached out and placed her small, trembling hand over Alaric's heart. "Rise, Alaric," Freya commanded softly. A new, regal authority weaving seamlessly into her tone. "We have a broken pack to heal. True nobility is never measured by the weight of a royal crown or the pristine cut of a velvet gown, but by the courage to show mercy when the world demands cruelty." Freya's ruined silk mended a broken kingdom, proving that compassion is the ultimate alpha trait. Her reign beside Alaric became a legendary testament that the greatest power in any realm is a profoundly kind and truly fearless heart.
Hi, my name is King's Obsession Conquered, the owner and manager of King's Obsession Conquered. After watching the video, she helped an old woman during mate selection, not realizing she was the Alpha King's lost mother. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was how a small act of kindness ended up meaning far more than anyone expected. The woman didn't help the old stranger for attention, reward, or status. She simply chose compassion in a moment when most others were focused on themselves. I think that's what gave the story its emotional heart. Sometimes the quiet choices we make when nobody is watching can completely change the direction of our lives. Do you think the Alpha King valued her kindness more than anything else during the mate selection? And why do you think people are often revealed most clearly by the way they treat those who seem powerless or unimportant? Stories like this remind us that respect, empathy, and patience can leave a lasting impact in ways we may never fully realize at the time. If this story connected with you emotionally, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional Alpha King stories filled with loyalty, mystery, and unexpected connection, feel free to like and subscribe only if you'd like to see more.